read it four. I read this material years ago, reading it again, reading it again today. It is like an adventure story. Think of every scene again cinematically. Really, it's very helpful. There's people chasing each other. There's all kinds of wonderful things. People getting there just in the nick of time. It is like it's a film script. And if you take each episode, I'll give you a few examples. We'll do tonight, and I have a few questions to ask you as well. But what is it? Let's start with some of the cool questions. What is it? What did you get out of the story of Goliath that's different than your traditional, if you will, understanding of Goliath? What was different? Don't be shy. Did you get more information? Did you get less information?
I think his armor was too heavy.
His armor, Goliath's armor.
Yes.
Yes, you should have gone to a different tailor. That's true. He would have saved it. Right, that's true. You think the armor was too heavy?
Yes.
Right. Isn't it interesting later on in the story that he will get the sword of Goliath to fight with?
Yes.
Remember when he gets that, he goes to the prophets of Nob, right, into there, and they give him sacred bread, consecrated bread, which is kind of interesting, and a sword. So it's kind of interesting that he's getting that same sword that he had taken from Goliath that had wound up somewhere else as a relic or something else. It's kind of interesting. What else about the Goliath story, perhaps, that enlightened you in a way that you were not enlightened before? Yes.
How old was he? He was very young, wasn't he?
The Goliath?
No, David.
Yeah, David was young. David was young.
Yeah.
David is the youngest of all these brothers, right? And he's taken sort of seriously, but he's the kid. He's the kid.
He's a kid, right?
Right. So remember when Samuel comes to look for someone, the first thing that his father Jesse Yishai says, "Yeah, here's my oldest boy, great kid. He should be king." You know, he doesn't know he's going to be king, but this is the kid.
Right.
Says, no, I'm looking for the little guy. Of course, that's part of the whole idea that we get all through the 5 books of Moses, which is that the youngest overturns the oldest always, right? Every story we have in Genesis is about taking away the special character of the firstborn. Anything else about that story? Because there's a lot to talk about. Don't worry about it. We got time, but we got not that much time. Yeah. Yeah. Yes. Did I see Bob? Wanted to say something?
No, I just signed in. What chapter and verse are we?
Well, if you go to the story of Goliath, it's chapter 17. Chapter 17. When
Okay.
as I said, I'm trying to avoid reading these entire chapters in class. We'd have no time to discuss anything.
Right.
But there is 2 sort of versions here, and you begin to see a little bit of the sloppy putting together of the text. Like you have, we have the story of David's family and name, etc. And then again, it starts again, as if it's reintroducing this character again. So how that happens, historically is very interesting. Different tales are being told. And by doing that, you basically can get more than one version of it. Also, I saw there was one part in the on chapter 27. I'm jumping ahead, but just to give you an idea of what a story is. The name of the city that it was given to David was Ziklag, as it is still called to this very day. Oh, so what are you hearing about that? Right. This is an Altamisa. It's an old story, right? And it's like an origin tale. It's an origin story, right? This is what Ziklag is, and this is the history of it. So again, we get very clear evidence that this is a story that is being told, whether it's around the fireplace or elsewhere. The feats, F-E-A-T, of David become a part of the national saga of the Israelites. So let's go back to Goliath just for a moment. It's a dramatic tale. Yes, please.
Question. So are there multiple storytellers here? Because, given the repetition sometimes of, I thought, there's Hanyunkel doing one, and then his competitor from, says, I have a better story. and tells the
You
same
have more
story.
than one story going around. You have more than one story going around at any given time. And like the 5 books of Moses that we study critically more, we realize that one of the ways that you preserve why things were preserved in writing was to make sure that all of the different renditions would be recorded. It's not wanting to. The editor did not say, I like this story better. He said, no.
But they sometimes sit on top of one another.
Sometimes they do, right? As I say, they reintroduce all of a sudden David's biography again after we've already seen it. The whole chapter that I asked you to read, the first chapter 16, it's sort of a strange chapter as well, because there it says David is anointed already as king before the Goliath story.
Yes.
Right. So that really is basically, you know, the way I see it is, think of that chapter as sort of a preamble chapter, giving you basically why it's important to read it, because this is the anointment of David. But he doesn't become king yet. What is the way of him becoming king through the whole story? What's the way of him? Saul wants to kill him. It's kind of hard, you know. He wants to kill him. So get this idea of thinking of this as, I don't want to call it Robin Hood and his merry men, but you do have David as this unique cavalier character, singer, good looking. You'll see more about his being good looking later on in the story when we move on. And you have basically this wonderful character who has gathered together men. What kind of men has he gathered together? If you take a look at, let me see.
I think misfits largely.
Misfits, angry people. He was a populist. People with grievances, people who had loans that they couldn't pay back. So he's really not surrounding himself by the graduates of West Point. Okay, he's not.
There were that many people to choose from.
Well, according to the story, and I find that a little hard to take. I think it's an exaggeration. It talks about having 400 men, fighters, and 200 who were doing all the stuff before you go out to fight. That's quite a large crowd, 600, especially if you're trying to avoid being seen. It's kind of tough if you have 600 people traveling at any time. Well, the numbers could have been exaggerated, but this idea that he's a free agent is really a very fascinating. Think of all of the Robin Hood stories you saw, right? There is this poo-poo evil king, the sheriff of Nottingham, he's out to get him, and they always find a way of getting around it. And not only that, and I don't think he's doing this in a mocking way, David, but he seems to really have a very complex, we can talk about a little bit more, relationship with Saul. He has an opportunity to kill him a number of times.
Right, and he doesn't.
And his men around him are saying, wait, what an opportunity. He's lying in a ditch with a spear, his own spear. Take the spear and spear him. You know what? I can do it. You wouldn't have to do it twice.
He doesn't kill anybody except for Goliath. I think he
doesn't kill anybody. Well, he kills.
Well, no, when he goes on his
other way, right? He learns to kill people in other ways, as we'll see a little bit later on.
Well, it talks.
I have a question about this.
It talks in the later chapters about his brutality.
Yes.
Killing men, women, children, sparing no one. And I read that it had a different. I read it differently this time because of what's happening in Israel and what Hamas did. It's not a whole lot different.
Not a whole lot of difference. A lot of violence in the human condition. I hate to bring it up. Some of you may have noticed, but it's been there for a while. Whether it's going to subside matters how messianic you are. So even then, I'm not sure. Because it's a dicey things. But what we're getting all through these chapters that I gave you are these adventure stories, and you'll notice it stops. There's sometimes an interlude, and then another story begins, and not all happening narratively necessarily one after the other in seriatim. It's not necessarily the case. There are different stories based upon this general idea that he has to get out of town and he has to protect himself, and he uses very wisely and connivingly a way to get actually into Philistine in order to protect himself. Remember that? Achish, the king, says, well, now you come fight with us against the Israelites, right? He says, well, not so fast. I don't think I'm going to do that. And, instead, he actually saves a community, if you remember that community, saving it, and that community that saves it turns on him, right, and tells Saul that that David is there. So it's a little bit like, I don't want to call it road runner, etc. But it's wonderful how they just get there at the right time. They save it. And later on, you read the story of Naval and Abigail, right? Naval, by the way, in Hebrew, Naval means vile one. It's not a pretty name. It's not a great name. Don't name your kid Naval, unless he's right. Don't. And a menuvel in Yiddish, you say is a menuvel. It means a nasty person, and he's obviously a wife beater, a wife abuser. She sees him, doesn't tell you how he dies, just says, well, after his wife, he died. Whether David was encouraging that death, we can't really say, or one of his merry men, but but she goes off with him. He marries her, and he marries another woman. He likes getting married. He really does. And he's allowed to be married, have many wives. That's true until very late, 1,000 years ago, when they stopped allowing polygamy. So
Moshe, could you remind us? Didn't God tell David not to kill Shaul?
Yes, that's part of it. But he had all these rough guys around him, and then he really works on them, saying, "And don't go up against Shaul."
Yeah,
he says that very clearly, very with as an order.
Yeah,
don't rise up against him. It's not our job to kill Shaul. However, I want to tell Shaul, and you get this very poignant thing. Let me see what page is on. The very poignant thing of Shaul and David actually confronting each other. Remember that? It's after the cave issue where he takes the two things from where he's sleeping and brings it, and they see each other from afar. It's very dramatic, And he says, "That's that you, David," etc. And then he goes into this melancholy kind of, King Learish kind of thing, of why am I being so evil to you? What's going on? And of course, the way that he's always portrayed is he's been overcome by the spirit of God's sadness. He's depressed. He's melancholic. And when you're melancholic or depressed, you don't necessarily see clearly. And he's filled with this anger, jealousy, mostly jealousy. Why? Because the maidens of Israel are singing what? The songs are
Shaul killed his thousands and David tens of thousands.
Tens of thousands, right? So so it's obviously an attempt to humiliate him, and he seems very humiliated and works out of a state of humiliation and anger. So in that, if you take a look, let me see. I'm going to take a little look. There was a very poignant moment. I just took a note of it. There it is. Okay, I'm looking at. I'm using Everett Fox's translation, but you can use any translation. Okay.
What chapter and verse?
Yeah, I'm going to give it to you right now. Okay. It's chapter 25, verse 16. Okay.
Verse what?
25:17. Shaul recognized David's voice. He said, "Is that your voice, my son David?" "It is my voice, my lord king." And he said, "Why does my lord pursue after his servant? Indeed, what have I done? And what evil is there in my hand? Why are you after me? What did I do to you, basically? So now pray, let my lord king hearken to the words of his servant, the servant of David. If it is Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh who incited you against me, let him smell a gift offering." Meaning, I'll offer a sacrifice. We'll deal with the ritual part of satisfying God, so he would let us get out of this chasing around. But if it was by humans, let them be damned before Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, for they have driven me away today from being attacked to Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh's inheritance, saying, "Go serve other gods." Meaning, if it's a human desire that people are conniving against me, and maybe convincing you that I had did something wrong, if that's the case, let them be damned. And what they're doing is they're driving me away from the home my new home. He ensconced himself there, and it's as if you were saying, "Go serve other gods. Leave here. Go into another culture." So now he says, verse 20, "Let not my blood fall to the earth away from the presence of Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, for the king of Israel has come out to seek a single flea, as one pursues a partridge in the hills." Isn't it a beautiful image? Right? You're going after me, a flea, with a blunderbuss going after a partridge. Right? It's a beautiful, beautiful image there. And Shaul said, "I have sinned." Interesting. "I have sinned. Return, my son David. Return. I will do no more evil to you. Since my life was precious in your eyes today, you could have killed me when I was in the cave, and you didn't. Here I have acted foolishly, and I've erred exceedingly greatly." And David answered and says, "Here is the king's spear, by the way, the one you had, and let one of the serving lads cross over and fetch it." Notice that they don't get close physically. So all this answer is there of forgiveness, and he says in verse 23, "And may Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh return upon each man his righteousness and his trustworthiness, seeing that Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh gave you into my hand, but I would not stretch out my hand against Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh's anointed. He see Saul as the anointed one." Okay, and it's not in his being anointed, which I think is out of place in that story, to be very honest. Probably happened after Saul's death, perhaps. But Saul said to David, blessed are you, my son David. You will do well. You will prevail, yet prevail." And that's the story. And then David went on his way, and Shaul returned to his place. It wasn't the end of Casablanca. They don't walk off together at sunset. So this is really, for me, I mean, it's very dramatic, because at this point already, Shaul is getting to that place where he knows ultimately he's not going to catch David. David could have killed him a number of times. David is still in relationship with him. He would like to be in relationship, but he can't be in relationship with him, because that evil,
I think I mentioned
I want to stop doing. He gets overwhelmed again, and sometimes he can't control his own evil based on his own mental condition, possibly. So that's a wonderful scene. And then he goes on, of course, that he has to go to Philistine. He's there for 7 years, and he does some wonderful things. But along the way, we had a couple of really wonderful adventures in the middle and the end as well. For instance, when he wants to rescue his wife, from the Amalekites, he does it with great alacrity and etc. So we find 3 or 4 things that are basically characteristic of David in this early period. One, he sees himself as still attached to the royal court, but he's profoundly disturbed by the fact that Shaul wants to kill him. Second, he has a capacity to create great friendship. We learn about him as a friend. Very famous model of friendship is Jonathan and David. Right. Jonathan actually ascertains for David that he should get out of town because his dad really wants to kill him. It's not just talking, but he's going to go do it. Third, we see him as sort of a defender of the country folk, someone who's in the hinterlands, away from the palace, etc., defending people, particularly in the number of villages that he discovers are being attacked. So he has gathered together this force. It's not a force big enough to take over Shaul. However, it is a force to be reckoned with if he joins with Shaul in fighting the Philistines, because that was always that issue. Where will he go? Will he remain loyal or not remain loyal? Meanwhile, in the final battle of Gilboa, Shaul is killed, as well as Jonathan, and it really ends that whole period of time. But it causes another issue for Shaul. But before he dies, he hears Samuel, who he has asked a witch to bring up from the dead, if you remember, Samuel, witch of Endor. He went and he changed his clothes. He didn't want to be recognized as somebody who goes to the witches because, according to the Torah, you shouldn't go to a witch. Certainly not one that brings up the dead. Now, they're not coming up all far because in those days, the dead lived in sort of a netherworld around us in a way. Well, she brings up Shaul. Shaul says, you know what? You're going to die. And then indeed he is killed. And that story ends there. And then we move into the next stories that we'll be reading in a little while. But I just want to say a few more words about a few things here. Hold on.
The other thing about yes. David is he's very clever with language.
He's clever with language, yes, very much.
Yeah. So when he said to when he said to the priest said no, he says I'm on a mission for the king. When he said that, he did not mean Shaul.
Yeah. Yeah.
He meant
on a mission, right?
Melech Malchei Amlachim. He meant Hashem, but he knew how they would understand it.
Right.
He had a way of talking that way.
William Greenberg, how are you?
Good. I want to pick up on one thing you said. Perhaps you don't want to go here now, but that's your call. You said that it's a model friendship with Jonathan.
Yeah.
And in reading it, I was struck by what a peculiar friendship it is, idiosyncratic. It seems that, and please correct me if I misunderstand, it seems to me that Jonathan is utterly infatuated with him,
enamored,
seduced. He's just crazy about him, and it does not seem to be the friendship of equals in any way. So, do you see it differently, or?
No, I'm saying there are many people who emphasize the homoerotic issue.
Sure.
The homoerotic issue, sort of.
But it's not. It doesn't seem to be bilateral. It seems to be.
Well, he's using him, right? He's using him.
Yeah.
It's hard to know what that really story is about. Except one thing, it might be that he really truly believes his father's mad.
Well, his father attacks him. Really his father throws a spear at him.
Right. And he misses him, right? But he says, if David would have been sitting next to me at dinner, that spear would have gone right through him.
Yeah.
So I think he sees his father is mad. He sees how successful David is. We don't know the ages. Is he, if you talk about these, Andre Aciman novels, it's always a young 18-year-old, meeting somebody 22 or something like that, an older person. I don't think there's really any way in the text we can read about.
Yeah.
I think people want to read into the text, of course. Look at this, a wonderful example of a bromance, a real bromance. I think what David does is when he meets people, he charms them.
Yeah.
And he charms them not only by his personality, his good looks, but he's also very talented. He plays music. All the guys who play guitar, they do very, 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 very well. That's true. Nobody messes with the drummer too much, but the guitar guy gets a lot of action. So he's playing, he's singing, and people know him, and he seems to be you get no sense here really until he gets older, as we will see, it just progresses, that he can get into that kind of moody, angry kind of place. And he has a lot of that. I'm not trying to paint him as a tzaddik. He's not a tzaddik. He's a manipulator, and he basically sees the best ways to achieve power, and he gets the power he needs. And we'll read about that in the next place, consolidation of the kingdom. How does he get all of these? How do you get Jews in general? How do you get them to agree about anything? So in that case, it is a miraculous thing that he's able to consolidate people into one kingdom. So a few other things that I wanted to mention, but let me just open it up for your questions as well.
Moshe?
Yeah, please.
So in your description of David, he has all of these gifts, if you will, and I don't see anything in the text per se that questions it, but is he authentic? Is he being Machiavellian in his approach here? Is he using his gifts in a manipulative way, or is what you see what you get, and later on he comes to use his gifts in a different way? But it's really a transactional kind of relationship.
Very good question. Yeah, I think when people have a taste of power, as he got a little bit taste of power, Samuel he must have gotten a fairly big head after killing Goliath. I have a feeling he did well in the press. I think people say, "Oh, you hear about that David? He killed Goliath."
By the way, did you mean that? Did you mean that as funny? He got a big head.
Yes.
Okay.
And inadvertent.
Yeah.
So forgive me for that pun if that was a pun. But yes, he got a big head, and I can see how he would threaten the powers that be. There's no question about it. Like every good cowboy movie you've ever seen, right? When the young kid who nobody paid attention to is on, with the gunslinger High Noon, right? And the little guy gets the bad guy. Hey, he gets a name for himself. And then, of course, the bottom line is, as you know, in the cowboy movies, there's always somebody trying to be faster than he is on the draw. That always happens, right? So he's constantly have to worry about staying alive, right? So there's a little bit about that too. David did very well, but he's always got to be worried that there are people who want to stand in his way. Speaking of funny places, when David, chapter 21, verse 13, 21:13, he wants to get into Philistia and to a city called Gat. We have a place now, Kiryat Gat, right? Ashkelon, all those places you hear about, they're all part of the Philistine Empire. Gat, Gaza. Gaza was one of the important cities. We know that from the book of Judges with the story of Samson. Anyone remember the study of Samson and Delilah? Also a bad film. No one ever did a good film of that. But Samson is brought to Gaza, the famous eyeless in Gaza, and he's blinded. And remember, he is the great hero of the Israelites. They're being mocked, and he's taken to the main temple, and one arm is put around a chain around one column, and another arm, another column, and he's blind, and his hair has come back, his strength is gathering, and he pulls the two columns and says, "If I die with them all." And that's the ending of that very dramatic piece. But here's an interesting thing. So he says, David took these words to heart. Right? We'll go back. So yes, he wants to go into to the king of Gath. So now the servants of Achish said to him, "Isn't this David, the king of the land?" Interesting. They already see him as the king. Isn't it about this one that they chant in their dances, saying, "Shaul has struck down his thousands, but David his myriads"? And David took these words to heart and was exceedingly afraid in the presence of Achish, the king of Gath, because now he can be seen as a threat. So he altered his demeanor in their eyes, and he feigned madness while he was in their hands. He drummed on the doors of the gate and let spittle run down his beard. And then the reaction is, Achish says to his servants, "Here, look at this man acting crazy. Why do you bring him to me? Do I lack crazy people? That you have brought me this one to act crazy around me? Should this one come into my house?" But it worked. He was able to feign madness. Now, is feigning madness a manipulative thing? I guess so. He wants to basically get where he wants to go, and he does what he has to do to do it to get there. Just trying to look at one more thing.
I guess my question about manipulation is there's one that's reactive and there's one that's proactive.
Okay.
So how strategic is this? I mean, is he playing with an end game in mind, or is he surviving?
Right. At this point, this will change a lot when we get to Samuel. Next week and the week after, we'll have some assignments reading ahead. But it changes dramatically. This ends the story. Yes, it's a story that ends, and you can see the ending being that David and Shaul are not going to be in confrontation much and more, and basically Samuel will die and Shaul will die. And that opens up the whole field. Jonathan dies as well, which is also very tragic. He no longer has that ally that he wished he had, because people might have supported Jonathan. People who supported Shaul may have supported Jonathan being Shaul's son. But now he has to see everyone who has supported Shaul as a potential enemy, with other people vying for the kingship at this point. He won't be the only one. That's a sort of a gay Game of Thrones kind of thing, right? There can be many people who believe they should be sitting on the throne, right? And David has got the inside track a little bit because of his reputation, and he's married to Shaul's daughter, Michal. She helps him get away. You saw that piece there? Beautiful piece where she helps him out the window, and she makes a phony thing on the bed, so he would think that David's sleeping, and then when he opens it, oh, it's a phony thing, like every film I used to see. It's pillows and a blanket. Here it happened to be idols. It's kind of interesting. Teraphim, idols. That's a really thing I would not expect to find there.
I had a question about that.
Yes,
that just struck me. The idea of using an idol seemed odd. So I'm just curious. Any thoughts? Any interpretations of that?
Well, there are many, in the sense that we know that the entire prophetic period, this is the beginning of the prophetic period, they are constantly railing against what?
Idols.
Idolatry. So the question is there must be a lot of idolatry going on. Now, what does that mean? Are there people building big, stelae with phony gods, other gods' names, and bowing before it? No, it doesn't mean that. It means that you're hedging your bets. You have a little. We found this in many archaeological. You have a little calf. Some say, oh, that they were children's toys. They were not. They were little idols, representations of the various gods in your neighborhood, and you hedged your bets. So you shouldn't have had anything with a graven image, right? But these happen to somehow get into the house, and you create a certain kind of sanctity around them as well, just in case.
Yes, but David HaMelech had one the size of a human.
A terra. Well, it doesn't say that it says, I believe there it's a plural, teraphim. So it may not be one.
Well, it was large enough to fool.
That would be very weird, I admit. If there was one teraph who looked like a human being under the blanket, but it was a combination of things that she put together, But I agree, it would be very strange if there was a cultic figure in the shape of David or in the shape of a man at all. The two basic things that were in Canaan at that time were Baal figures. Baal figures were obelisks. Okay, obelisks, very phallic obelisks, and Astarte. A lot of stuff about Astarte, Queen Esther, Astarte, all those names are the same, right? Is that would be more of a fertility goddess. You may have seen them in Africa, right? The full-breasted ones, right? Who nurture, are part of growth and nurturing. So you found those as well in the ancient East, and you have, of course, the male and the female gods, etc., which are always in a sense of procreation. But I agree, it is bizarre, and yes, bizarre, not bizarre. Who is Michal? We don't know much about her, but Michal loves him. He does not requite the love. It's a very sad little story. As a matter of fact, eventually she will go away and marry somebody else. He does not take her back. There's some schism, and we'll see why the schism happens in the next part of the book, in the story of David bringing the ark from Hebron to Jerusalem, where he's establishing this new base. There you will see. We'll talk more about that in a little while. So these adventures of David and Shaul, I find them really dramatically wonderful. I think the language is really, really great. And again, stop after reading a chapter and say, think about what happened here. What happened here? If I had to stage this, how would I stage it? If I wanted to see it in front of me, how would I see it in front of me? take it out of the book, take it off the page, bring it into your own way of seeing things. It's very important to see this. If you want to see it on the proscenium stage, gesundheit. It's kind of hard to get the horses in the 400 men, but okay. If you want to see it like a John Ford Western, I think you're better off that way, by the way, because there's a lot of hills, a lot of valleys, a lot of horses running up and down. It has that kind of Western feel. And I see, I'm sorry that they've never been able to really do the story of David well, but eventually they will, perhaps. It's unclear. So just a few other things I wanted to talk about. We'll have some more conversation.
So one thing I know I mentioned at some prior class, there is a novel I read, and I can't remember all the details. It was written by an Israeli author and was translated into English, The Secret Book of Kings, and
Really?
it's a story from Michal's point of view
Oh,
of her
really?
being in love with David.
Oh, good. If you can find the name of the author, I'd love to.
Can I do what? I couldn't hear you.
If you're able to find the name of that author and the name of the book. You know who wrote the book, Evelyn?
I have the book on my Kindle.
Okay,
It's
you wrote it.
by Yochi Brandis.
Yochi Brandis. Good to know.
The Secret Book of Kings, and it's translated into English. It was apparently a bestseller in Hebrew in Israel.
Right. Yes, I'm sure it's a subject. I'm surprised a man wrote it, but it's also interesting that a man wrote it. And it's about me. Oh, it's kind of interesting. Yeah. Right. So there's one or two other places I wanted just to show you that I really found very okay, I love this little line. It says, verse chapter 18, verse 8. It says, Shaul became exceedingly upset when he heard the women dancing and chanting. As we said earlier, Shaul has struck down thousands, David tens of thousands, and he said to himself. I love this when you have a character talking to himself when we're told about it. You don't get a lot of that, by the way.
Very 19th century.
Books of Moses, you don't get a lot of that. And he says, little voice inside, hey, they give credit to David for myriads. To me, I only get credit for thousands. What's going on here? Yet there remains for him only the kingdom, and yet he wants to take over the kingdom. And Shaul was keeping an eye on David from that day on. So he's already been basically realizing that David is a rival, even after the Goliath event, etc. And we have to understand that the fact that he was chastised by Shmuel, I think causes him to really be more and more frightened about the possibility of David taking on men. By the way, when you talked about the Terafim in chapter 19, verse 16, when the messengers arrived, now here, Terafim, plural, were in the bed with some twined goat's hair at its head. So it's like they built this like a scarecrow kind of thing with these Terafim, and they did a head to it. And Shaul said to Michal, why have you deceived me thus? You have set free my enemy so that he has escaped. And Michal said to Shaul, he said to me, send me free. Why should I be put you to death? And now David had gotten away and escaped, coming to Shmuel at Ramah. And he told Shmuel all that Shaul had done to him. And he went, him and Shmuel, and they stayed in Naot. And then the word came out that he was in Naot, and Shaul sent messengers. And this is an interesting passage, verse 20, on chapter 19. So Shaul sent messengers to take David, and they saw a group of prophets ranting in prophecy. What a wonderful way of saying it. Ranting in prophecy. And Shmuel standing there, stationed over them, and they came upon Shaul messengers, the Spirit of God, so they ranted like prophets too. So everybody's starting to rant like a prophet. I don't know how you rant like a prophet. Anybody here ever ranted at all? I haven't ranted in a long time. I shouldn't say that. I've ranted recently, and I'm sorry for it. They told Shaul, and he sent other messengers, and they ranted like prophets, they too. And Shaul again sent a third group of messengers, but they ranted like prophets too. So he went, he too, toward Ramah. And when he arrived at the great cistern that is Zeku, he made inquiry, says, where are Shmuel and David? And they said, oh, they're in Nayot in Ramah. I love that. They went that away. There's always a guy who knows where everything is, right? And it came upon him, the Spirit of God. He went, going along, and ranting like a prophet. So is he really ranting like a prophet rants, or is he making believe he's ranting like a prophet? It doesn't really matter, but he does this until he arrives in Nayot. And he stripped off his garments, and he ranted like a prophet before Shmuel, and he fell down naked all that day and all night. Therefore, they say, is Shaul too among the prophets? Did Shaul become a prophet? So we don't know if he really became a prophet. I doubt it, but he went in order to basically make amends to Shmuel, to show him that he basically, too, can be filled with the Spirit. That's really one of the real things that we talk about here, is filled with the Spirit of God. Even in the mundane stories about getting away and chasing and all that, you have these little asides. They're not central, but and Yahweh and you, Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, said to me, what's David saying? Is he justifying what he's done by saying, well, God told me to do it, or is it just that little voice in his head, which a lot of us have? So if you think it's God, you got to talk to somebody, they say. But whatever it is, it's always this little asides. It isn't like their lives are anchored in Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh. It's like most of us, we may not be anchored into the divine, but we use a lot of God language. You say, God forbid. You say, all of a sudden you see God language all around us, but not necessarily saying it in a way like God spoke to Moses and Aaron. So Jonathan and David, as I said earlier, are a classic and important way of seeing his capacity for relationships, both with men and both with women. And then, of course, at the end, chapter 31, we read about the death of Shaul, and it's a very sad story. He falls on his sword and basically sees that it's all over. And it is definitely all over. And then next Samuel 2, which we'll begin reading for next week, will take us into this new stage. And we'll be able to, I think, see a lot of changes. And I think those changes are helpful. But I want us to keep the image, if you can, of a sort of a Robin Hood and his merry men kind of guy, right? He's out there in the forest. He knows land. He's able to hide. He's able to knows the terrain very, very well. And he often is able to if you will, take advantage over Saul, because Shaul is always traveling with a larger entourage, being a king and a heavily, armored soldiers, etc., etc. So that's going to change. Going to get this different kind of David emerging, and by the end of his life, you'll see even a third guy emerging. Now, that's for me. That's an example of why the story works. He changes. He develops. He doesn't remain one static kind of person. He's able to adjust himself to different things, and he will develop his own jealousies, his own mishigasim. And I think part of what happens when you get into power is that you begin to realize you got to do a lot to keep that power. And we're going to see that all the way through the end of his life, where he says to his son Solomon, at the end, he says, there are three guys you got to kill them right away. They're going to cause you trouble. Like, Don Corleone. You got to get these guys out of the way. They're going to stand in your way. So he gets a pretty long enemies list, which is probably not uncommon for people in power. And he will become a rough guy. He's rough now, but there's something still soft about him. Something soft. There's something that the way he constantly is trying to somehow show Shaul that he doesn't hate him. That Shaul is not seen by him as an enemy. That there maybe we get a hint. I thought we would have a hint when he saw in the conversation I read to you, a hint of reconciliation. But at the end, he goes his way and Shaul goes his way. There really is no way to reconcile this anger and desire to kill David, and David's desire to get back home. I think he would not, of course, return to the palace, even in whatever capacity, knowing about Shaul's desire to kill him. Any more questions, comments?
I have one, if I might. This is Bruce. So,
Hi, Bruce.
Hi, Reb Moshe and all. So if we go back to the Goliath story, there's a detail that suggests a motivation to me, and I wanted to ask your thoughts or others.
Please.
And that is, guys are standing around and they say, you know, he who gets Goliath will get rich and he'll get the king's daughter. And then David asks, so what happens if I get Goliath? And he's told that the motivation there seems his improvement, sort of his acquiring. It's not to save the country, to save the nation. It's not to get rid of this enemy. It suggests that it's to get money and a wife and a promise.
Well, it also plays on a classic theme, right? We have of the hero. How does the hero prove himself, right? He pulls the sword out of the, Excalibur out of the rock, or he has to do something extraordinary. And in doing something extraordinary, he lifts himself up, and he basically now becomes a new person, and he has a new family, a new wife. He's transformed, and in this case, he's transformed with a way to get close to the king, which he probably never thought or never wanted to be honest, because the way his life is described in Bethlehem, he's a happy-go-lucky guy. He's watching the sheep. He doesn't have much to do. He's the kid brother. People probably play with him. Who knows? He plays music. So it isn't like he's coming out of a dreary, Dickensonian, kind of horror, and he's going to be saved. He's not being saved. It's just an added incentive. Having the wife of having the daughter of the king is an added incentive. I don't think so. He's either going to kill the Goliath or he's not. And it doesn't matter what he's going to get for it ultimately, because ultimately this killing of Goliath, the Philistines see it as a symbol, right? It's symbolic. Why would they? Even the drama, imagine today, except in the Game of Thrones, where you say, I'll send out my giant to kill your giant, and then that will settle the war. They actually have scenes with giants in the Game of Thrones, all the time. And they're always killing each other. But the bottom line, it's contrived in a very interesting way. It's contrived. How do you create this remarkable scene of this? Now, by the way, I don't know how tall David was. Maybe somebody 6'5" looked very, very tall. I have no idea. But let's imagine he was a big guy, Goliath, and getting him right between the armor. It's unbelievable story, right? It's just it's a wonderful example of how the hero has to prove himself in valor. In valor. Valor is the big word here, right? Valor. And I think that's a good word to use of how he treats Shaul. Even though Shaul's after him, he still has valor. And it's just such a dramatic scene. It's just and of course it's become a major theme in all of the world, David and Goliath, right? Everybody, and what's going on now in the Middle East, it's always the issue of who's the David and who's the Goliath, right? That's the issue. I remember years and years ago, I was in a show in Tel Aviv. It was called Unfair to Goliath. It was after the 6-Day War. And people were, this comic writer wrote a little play about it, how everybody is now sorry for Goliath because Goliath got beat up by David. And that's what's happening before our eyes too, right? The shift from David to Goliath, and etc. That's it's not easy. It's not easy at all. Yes, sir. Anybody else?
Can I ask a contextual question?
Yes.
And again, I don't know how all of the pieces fit together.
Right.
I was learning Hebrew for a period of time with Sam Seiko, and
right.
we were reading, parts of the Torah. And I remember when we were going through the story of, Jacob and Rebecca, and there was one of the things that he noted there was that there seemed to be a section that was written by, people along the coast. There was another section that was written by a more agricultural people. Somehow or other, I think over centuries, there was a group that tried to bring these things together and try to figure out which is which. And there's a lack of continuity in a lot of it.
Right.
It
Right.
doesn't
the way
seem
the way they deal with it is using the rabbis, of course, noticed the chronology was off. We're not the first ones, and they said Ein Mukdam ve'Ein Muchar. There is no chronology.
Yeah, but sometimes the same story shows up twice and it's different
Yes, that's
people.
right.
And there's that kind of stuff.
Right.
But I was wondering, in terms of the most recent, definitive translation. And by the way, based on your advice, I got Everett Fox's book. I love it. It just reads so well.
Reads very well, yeah.
Yeah. But what is the, if you will, what's the gold standard for the Bible that we read? I mean, I also had read a book on what is it called? The Crown of Aleppo, which was the Torah, parts of which survived and others.
Right, the Aleppo Codex, yes.
And so I look at this and I sort of say, I love the story, and then there are inconsistencies. At a later, who resolved all of this?
Okay, good question. I'll just spend a few moments because we're going to be ending. But just in general, you should, if you haven't discovered this, those who have been to class with me in the last few years on reading Torah, is there is this idea called the documentary hypothesis. And the documentary hypothesis posits, it's a hypothesis because no one was there, I wasn't there, I don't know, is that there were 4 documents that the 5 books of Moses can be broken up into. And that you can, if with philological studies, comparative words used in Akkadian and the Nabatean and all kinds of ways, you can see which the documents have come together. And sometimes the doubling is there for 2 things. One is the second time sort of expands upon the first, but it also could be there were 2 stories that were coming together. And I use a wonderful website, which I recommend if you like this kind of stuff. It's a little academic. It's called thetorah.com. Pretty simple, the Torah. And what it has is scholars who know both the traditional commentators, who basically are always apologetics, right? The apologists trying to say there's no contradictions in the Torah, etc. And you have these people also great scholars, and they know, and they pull apart stuff and they put stuff together, and they say by pulling it apart, it's called deconstruction, right? We deconstruct. It's a school of literary theory, deconstruction, and then you put it back together, and you're able to sort of get the document that is readable. Now, remember, there's no attempt to say that anything after the 5 books of Moses has divine source. Keep that in mind, right? God did not give the people the story of David. There's no attempt to even think about that. It's a human, definitely a human development. And once you see it as a human development, you say, okay, we understand how stories come together. We know this from Greek mythology. We know from African mythology how stories come together. And each of the 4 documents had an axe to grind. It's fascinating. So rather than having the editor, who the editor is, good question. Some say the editor is Ezra HaSofer. Ezra the scribe, who comes from Babylonia back to Palestine and given the right to build the second temple, right? Because of the defeat of the Babylonians by the Persians. By the way, the Iraqis and the Iranis were fighting for a long time. It's only 3,000 years. That's all. They've always been rivals, the Iranians and the Iraqis. So they say maybe Ezra did it. Why? Because Ezra brings in this new script, the script that we use now. The Hebrew didn't look the way it looks now. It was more cuneiform kind of looking, which was easier to do if you're working with stone. Cuneiform is a lot easier than cursive, to be honest, right? So that's one thing. So he changes the script, He supposedly inaugurates the reading of Torah in a public place, which did not happen before. Mondays and Thursdays in the marketplace. We still read Torah Mondays and Thursdays, based upon that. And it's possible that Ezra was the editor, the redactor, right? So it's a big R, big redactor. Could have been a school of redactors, a committee, which explains how the translations that we have in the Bible are the way they are, because they're done by committee, so they aren't all the great. So we don't know, but we are more and more able to pull apart these documents and see how one amplifies the other. And they do it with philology, mostly philology. For instance, Leviticus, right, is about the Kohanim, right, and the order of the service. What's big and important about the order of our services? It's orderly. It's always a step and another step. It's not, Mishikas. So they say maybe this priestly school wrote the first chapter of Genesis. Why? What's big there? Order, differentiation. Possibly. It makes sense philologically. You get the same kind of, a sense of what the priestly document wants to do. Then we have the J document, and then we have the D document, and then we have I don't want to leave out any document, and then we have the J, we have the E, the D, and the P. Right. The E is the use of the word Elohim. If you see the word Elohim, it may be an E document. You see the word Yud He Vav He, it's a J document. Now, this plays itself out to a certain degree. Now, when it comes to the prophets, it's a different kind of analysis. We're not trying in any way to see documents that have come from different places. That's not the way we read it. There's no necessity for it in a way, because these are not canonical in the way that the 5 books of Moses are, which are authoritative. There's nothing authoritative. There's no halakha, by the way. Have you noticed? Nothing about halakha. You talk about korbanot, slaughter sites, and you talk about that, but there's no sense of the theology except that you think God's talking to you occasionally. Number of scholars, James Kugel was a major Bible scholar at Harvard. He wrote a book called The God of Old, where he
And
says
who wrote the Bible
there was
also?
a period of time in the period that we're talking about, and a little bit like in the sense of the Judges' time, a little bit where people did see images of God. They saw angels. It was not considered strange to see an angel. Samson's father, right, has an angel announced that Samson is going to be special, and he had to be, treated with special care. And it said it was part of, if you not that people were all hallucinogenics, we're taking a lot of hallucinogenics. I don't think so. There may be, but the bottom line is that there was a comfort with seeing things. And we have gotten away from that. We're afraid of visualizations too much, of trying to create pictures of God. That's a very big no for us. So so we sort of push that away. People seeing angels and stuff. And certainly by the rabbinic period, you don't have much to do with this kind of visual, if you will, connections to things. But I think here too, for all they talk about David being imbued by God, I have not yet, and we will see perhaps a little bit more. It's very interesting to me that of all the things assigned to David, attributed to David, is what? The book of Psalms. It's interesting, right? There are some scholars who want to say there are 15 Psalms I could pull out, or 20 Psalms, and they all are autobiographical. David wrote this after this battle, or David wrote this after this event. Believe me, if I knew, I'd tell you. I'm not hiding it. I don't know. But it is interesting that he has been associated with this remarkable trove of literary styles and images that are unbelievable, the Psalms, if you think about it. So it's quite clear that what I think happened was that there was a reputation that David had of being a singer. Singer meant writing poems. That's what it's meant to be, a singer. Shirah is in modern Hebrew is poetry. It's not song, poetry. And it's quite possible that a lot of these psalms, a school of psalmists, basically attributed to David. And we have some Mizmor LeDavid, right? You may have heard that, right? Mizmor LeDavid. We have a number of psalms that start as a psalm for David. So they're attributing it to him, or they're writing it for him, or in lauding him and showing how remarkable he was. And we have other ones, Mizmor LaMatzeach Livnei Korach, the sons of Korach. So it's a very interesting study of the book of Psalms, and it's a connection to David. I think that's really very remarkable. What's our timing now? We're a little over. So for next time, we're not going to give you that much to read. I'm sorry, but I figured what it got to lose. So Book of Samuel, we're now at the end of book 1. We're starting book 2. And that's Shmuel Bet, chapter 1. What I want to go to. Okay. So what I'd like you to take a look at is from chapter 1. Just go to chapter 1 to 8. A little bit less than last time. 1 to 8. And 1 was already sort of finishes off the book from the first book. It sort of is a transition chapter to the second book. 1 to 8. I'll send you some stuff in the mail again about how to read it through. But we'll see certain important things happening. One, we're going to see the processes of consolidation, of how he basically, now that shows out of the picture, how he's able to create political alliances and consolidate and establish. We'll see at the end of Shmuel Bet, we'll be able to establish Jerusalem as a capital, a central location with natural defenses. And we'll also see that there is the beginning of seeing King David as the model king. The model king to all kings will be measured up to. He reaches this great status. And of course, his great disappointment, we'll see in a little while, when he wants to build a temple and he's told he cannot. And anybody remember why he cannot?
Because he was a warrior.
Too many warriors. Too many
warrior. And that's, of course, it's ironic, right? That's how he built this whole career, being a warrior. But being a warrior steps in the way of him fulfilling his own great ideal. So there's a lot of stuff going on. So 1 to 8, and I'll send you some stuff about what's happening in the various chapters. But just take a note sometime. Oh, I'm interested in this. Also, try to digest before you move on to something. Digest it. See it in your mind. See it as a play, a film. See how things look, what's coming closer at you, what's going further away. And then you move to the next story, and then you move to the next story. But, it's not a novel. It's not that kind of book. It's not a novel. It is a collection of stories. It's a short stories rather than a novel, okay? Those who have written the short stories know it's harder than writing a novel, right? Etc. So I wish to see you all next week. I hope the world will change until then. I'm not counting on it, but I still have that hope in my mind that human beings will somehow come to their senses. But maybe not. Maybe not. But it's going to be a tough battle for us, folks. The next few months, it's going to be hard. It's going to be hard.
Thank you very much.
I hope we will get to a place where we can have some sense of security and safety. I think that's very, very important. Good night, everybody. Good to see you all.
Good night.
Good
night. Thank you.
Good night.
Hi, Bobcat.
Thank you, Jessica.
Bye,
Bye,
Randy.
Bob. Good to see you. Bye-bye.